The following is an HDNet original presentation.
The following story contains graphic images that could be disturbing to some. Viewer discretion is advised.
Tonight, unrest and revolution rock the Middle East. A status quo shattered. But one volatile place hasn't appeared in the headlines. The West Bank, once an epicenter of instability and violence, today is calm, thanks in large part to a little-known U.S. military program. Can this fragile stability hold? That remarkable story, tonight on Dan Rather Reports.
Good evening. We come to you tonight from the line between Israel and the occupied West Bank, a place that has long known violence, but where now there is calm, bustling business, new security. But there remains concern that this can't last and that there could be a return to bloodshed.
It's a bloodshed that many of us remember all too well. Until recently, these were the pictures that came to our television sets from the West Bank. Israeli Defense Forces, known as the IDF, squaring off with young Palestinian stone throwers. Tear gas, bullets, the scream of sirens. And then there were these gruesome images from Israel. The deadly aftermath of Palestinian suicide bombers, one after another, streaming in from the West Bank. On the diplomatic front, peace talks between Israel and Palestinians seeking statehood perpetually stalled at the starting line. All this leaves an impression of a region in constant conflict. But behind the scenes in recent years, something remarkable has happened. Tonight, we are taking you to a West Bank as you've probably never seen it. Even as much of the Arab world erupts in protest, the streets in this place, known for unrest, remain surprisingly calm, safe, even vibrant.
This is $2. You know this money? Yeah, it's rare.
A big change from the flying bullets of just a few years ago. Part of the new reality is a Palestinian security force that is now a visible presence on West Bank streets. Its troops are disciplined, professional, armed, and uniformed. But behind these fresh forces is a hidden presence, one that many are uncomfortable discussing. Under the radar, the United States has been funding and training these troops to help the Palestinian government bring stability to the West Bank. Yes, you heard that right. Palestinian soldiers, once the sworn enemy of Israel, now being trained by the United States. And this little-known program that would have been at one time unthinkable has now helped usher in a new era of security. But to understand how we got here, we have to start our story in a much different time.
Where you're walking right now, when I was an attaché here before, was nothing but a battleground.
And a lethal battleground.
Lethal battleground. The Palestinians were mainly on these two streets here. The IDF was nominally over here at the time because it was protecting their flank, which is where the Israeli settlers lived over there.
Retired U.S. Army Colonel Philip J. Dermer has witnessed the security improvements here firsthand. He was one of the few people who was around for the launch of the U.S. military program that trained these troops who have helped transform the West Bank.
This is a central market, so this is where all life exists in any one of the cities in Palestine. Come in from the villages, buy their goods, and go out. Very simple, as you and I have seen many times.
Colonel Dermer came to the Middle East first as a young backpacker and went on to spend much of his 30-year military career in the region. We brought him back here because he is one of the few American officials who has spent a lot of time serving in the West Bank.
Palestinian Authority control over here.
He painted a picture of what it was like to witness the Israeli-Palestinian clashes from the front lines.
So if the Israelis are shooting right here, which they would be doing, the Palestinians are here with rocks, okay, and we'd be in a safe position. This shop would be shut, but this guy would have the lights on and the shutter open, just hopefully somebody might duck in the middle and buy something and then run home.
It's not funny.
It's not funny, but it's very human that even in the middle of this conflict, these guys are trying to make a living.
Right.
So now that it's all out and about again, mashallah, Arabic for great, okay, now they can go about their business, right? And they're loving it. You see what's happening. It's booming. And the security's out here.
It is booming.
It's booming. It's packed. And there's no Israelis now. There's no IDF. Once upon a time, you'd see towers around here. Okay, but they're out of sight now.
The West Bank is a piece of land smaller than the state of Delaware. Perched between Israel and Jordan, it's home to 2.5 million Palestinians and some 300,000 Jews.
The six-day Middle East war echoes along a second front, the diplomatic struggle at the United Nations Security Council.
For decades, the West Bank has been at the center of one of history's most intractable conflicts.
Israel reports close to 700 of their troops killed, over 2,500 wounded.
In 1967, Israel's Arab neighbors attacked the Jewish state in an effort to wipe it off the map. It was the third full-scale assault on the young Jewish state, a defining reminder that tiny Israel was surrounded by enemies.
The battle for Bethlehem is brief, bloody, and decisive.
But Israel fought back, and in a stunning series of battles, seized control of its enemy's land, including the West Bank from Jordan and the Gaza Strip from Egypt. For more than 40 years now, Israel has kept these territories as a security buffer. It's a state of uneasy occupation, made more explosive by the Israeli government's controversial decision to open up the land to Jewish settlements, now a major sticking point in the peace process. But throughout the West Bank, there's a new optimism. Business is booming. New construction is everywhere. There's even a 5-star hotel that just opened. On the surface, at least, there's a sense of normalcy. Colonel Dermer and I went to a popular restaurant in the city of Ramallah where families were out for a Sunday night dinner.
And when you sit down and you talk with the people, you begin to wonder, so what's the beef? What's the big deal going on here?
Well, what is the big deal over?
Well, as you well know, this conflict has been going on for a long time. And it's been one of the, I would argue, one of the focuses or the darlings of American strategic policy for many, many years. I've been in it personally for over 30 now. Traveling and living here as a private citizen, going to school here, from being an attaché here, from being a soldier here, from being part of the peace team, 1 or 2 of the peace teams that came out here, from being an advisor. And what's going on, I would argue, you could go all the way back to the Bible if you wanted to. But at the end of the day, when you get here and when you work here, you find out that these problems aren't so super scientific, they're not so out of the ordinary, they're basic human problems. What's going on behind that, though, however, is way more complicated and way more, there's a lot more context to it than I think that we get in the newspapers.
Dermer cited as an example the drop in suicide bombings in Israel. There hasn't been a strike for nearly 3 years. A great deal of credit has been given to a more than 200-mile-long barrier built by Israel to cordon off the West Bank. Before the barrier went up, there had been dozens of suicide bombings each year by Palestinians trying to break the will of their Israeli occupiers. What has gotten much less attention is what the Palestinians have been doing. The West Bank may not yet be a Palestinian state, but it's starting to act like one.
One reason why the whole world is looking at this issue with greater sense of urgency is precisely because they're looking at what we're doing on this other track of getting ready for statehood. I'm still betting on it.
Salam Fayyad is the Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority, which has governed most of the West Bank since serious talks of statehood began in 1993. Fayyad's a U.S.-educated economist. He was a member of Yasser Arafat's government, but unlike his late boss, is much more egghead than revolutionary. As Prime Minister, his leadership has focused on the banalities of good government, building institutions, roads, opening schools, promoting separation of powers, and developing professional national security forces. All this to show the Israelis that Palestinians are ready for statehood. Fayyad says the results speak for themselves.
Let me tell you the one statistic that, as a matter of fact, tells it all. Tells it all. I mean, I can tell you, give you a list of projects, number of schools we built, roads we paved over the past 2.5 years. But then, for the first time in many, many years, year 2009 appears to have been the first year in which the number of people coming back to Palestine crossed over with the curve that represents the number of people leaving Palestine. People are voting with their feet, so therefore people are more optimistic.
Count Western powers like the United States, Europe, and even Israel among those who are at least cautiously optimistic about Fayyad's government and the stability he's helped bring to the West Bank. It's a far cry from when Fayyad took office in 2007. At that time, a near civil war was raging in the West Bank. The Islamist group Hamas and the Palestinian Authority fought bloody street fights for control of the Palestinian territories.
The challenges that we faced in mid-2007 were absolutely enormous. Not many people gave us much of a chance.
That's true.
I did not give us much of a chance, to be honest with you, myself. But somehow we managed to move the country away from the brink of complete collapse. So conditions were extremely difficult.
Would you say improvement in security is the number one thing?
Absolutely. You cannot expect people to stick around if they do not have sense of personal security.
Today, the calm of the West Bank seems almost unremarkable. But getting to this point was never guaranteed. Consider the other Palestinian territory, the Gaza Strip. Its economy is a mess, it's isolated, and it's ruled by Hamas, a group bent on the destruction of Israel. The United States considers Hamas a terrorist organization and was determined to keep the West Bank from falling into its hands. In 2005, that mission was given to U.S. Army General Keith Dayton, who was posted to the region with little specific direction from Washington.
He was told to come into Palestine and see what he can do to facilitate the developments of the Palestinian security forces. You know, get on the ground and see what can be done, boots on the ground. Very simply put. I mean, there wasn't any written mandate or written instructions.
In a way, was he left on his own?
He was very much left on his own. He was not given any money. He wasn't given a whole lot of adult guidance from Washington, and he came out and he set to work.
Fair or unfair to say that in very large measure, we and everybody else have him to thank for this improved security that we see now.
We do. We do. As a part of it, he played a key part. His efforts are not the reason that we have improved security now, or that Israel and Palestine do, but very much a key part of it. Very much. Without his effort of, in a sense, stumbling, breaking walls, breaking phalanxes, battling even U.S. government elements, and not just Palestinian and Israeli elements, we wouldn't be where we are today, and that's my thesis.
Colonel Dermer worked alongside General Dayton and marvels at Dayton's legacy, a program that has trained some 3,500 new Palestinian security officers, now busy keeping watch over the West Bank day and night.
هتطلعوا كيفية الصعود المركبات زي ما تعلمت.
We rode along with them on one of their nightly patrols. The American training program behind these troops is known as the United States Security Coordinator's Office, the USSC, and has cost a relatively modest $400 million over 5 years.
I just want to know, we're kind of getting a profile of a checkpoint. When you stop a car, what are you looking for?
احنا في لنا اشخاص مطلوبين اشخاص فعلى الهوية الوثيقة الشخصية لو بنبحث عنها.
And when you look at a car, what makes you decide to stop a car?
يعني احنا ما بنستثني اي سيارة من لما تكون جيتنا بلاغ من العمليات انه في اشخاص مطلوبين ما بنستثني اي سيارة.
General Dayton's influence here is so great that these troops are known locally as Dayton forces. General Dayton may not be well known in his native United States, but here in the West Bank, Everybody seems to know his name. We traveled to the biblical oasis of Jericho in the low and dusty Jordan Valley. It's an area popular with American tourists who come to see the ancient sites, but little do they know that their tax dollars have built a modern military training facility on a nearby mountaintop. We were the first American news crew invited to film at the training center in Jericho. It's clear that the forces here were taking their mission seriously. They gave us a demonstration that highlighted their lethal training. And it's pretty easy to see what they are preparing for. Terrorist attacks, hostage situations, gun battles in the streets, even hand-to-hand combat. Some might see this training and think back to when the U.S. and Israel considered the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the predecessor to today's Palestinian government, to be a terrorist organization. But these security forces and the Americans who have supported them say they are a force for peace. You won't see any American instructors at this facility. They're at a base in Jordan, where these soldiers received their initial training. The U.S. Security Coordinator's office forbid us from filming there. But the troops here in Jericho were eager to show us the return on the U.S. investment. We got a tour of the base and sat down with Major Atef Nasser, who was in charge.
To someone in the United States who is watching and listening and says, well, we're spending this money helping the Palestinians build these security forces, why should we do that?
يعني في بداية حديثي بوجه الشكر للحكومة الأمريكية والشعب الأمريكي الصديق لأنه أقام لنا هذا الصرح أو المؤسسة وساعدنا في بناء هاي المؤسسة. وطبعا الشعب الأمريكي أكيد أنا مدرك تماما أنه معني بالسلام ومعني بالاستقرار في المنطقة بشكل خاص وبشكل عام، وإحنا كذلك نتمنى ونتطلع إلى مساعدتهم لإحقاق الأمن والاستقرار بالمنطقة بشكل عام. وأعتقد أنه هذا الرابط المشترك اللي إحنا نسعى له إحنا والأصدقاء الأمريكيين حتى يستطيعوا أطفالنا يعيشوا بأمان واستقرار سواء كانوا من الشعب الفلسطيني أو الشعب الإسرائيلي.
In a previously unthinkable arrangement, Palestinian security forces are even working side by side with the Israeli military in the West Bank. The reason for this uneasy alliance is to root out their common enemy, Hamas. But the Israelis wouldn't allow us to see this in action because that part of the story is so sensitive. At face value, most Palestinians welcome the presence of the new security forces on their once lawless streets. But when pressed, many are uncomfortable with Palestinian forces working so closely with their Israeli occupiers. The question that often comes up is, who are these forces designed to protect? Israelis or Palestinians? The issue exploded when, of all people, General Dayton set off a diplomatic firestorm addressing a pro-Israel crowd at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy in 2009.
Make sure you understand that. We don't provide anything to the Palestinians unless it has been thoroughly coordinated with the State of Israel, and they agree to it.
General Dayton meant to praise the progress of the Palestinian security forces, but he ended up playing into the hands of critics who say they're collaborating with Israel.
Now, upon the return of these new men of Palestine, they have shown motivation, discipline, and professionalism, and they have made such a difference, and I'm not making this up, that senior IDF commanders ask me frequently, how many more of these new Palestinians can you generate, and how quickly? Because they're our way to leave the West Bank.
The offhand remark reinforced what many Palestinians feared, that these new forces were simply a tool of Israel. Almost immediately, Hamas seized on the comments for their own propaganda purposes, and the Palestinian leadership was placed on the defensive.
Mr. Prime Minister, what was the effect here and on you and your efforts of the United States General Dayton's statements in Washington about creating a new Palestine?
Unfortunate. That caused us, if we talk about political problems and all.
It was hurtful.
Yeah, unfortunate. And, those comments, found a lot of currency, and a lot of people dealt in that currency and still do. And as a matter of fact, the sad part about that whole narrative, it doesn't really even come close to representing what General Dayton was supposed to help us with at all. General Dayton's mandate was to really oversee a program of training and rehabilitation of our security services. In the main, that meant overseeing the training of newly recruited young people joining the security services. Today, more than 3.5 years later, we have managed to employ and train about 3,500 new officers.
I can see this new generation of officers
yes.
On the street.
Yes.
In Ramallah,
yes.
Hebron, all around. It's a new generation.
Definitely. That's the future.
And you're giving him credit for helping to.
Well, there's no question. The program, the substance of the program, is something that we very much wanted and we benefited from.
General Dayton left his post here at the American consulate in Jerusalem in October 2010 and was replaced by Lieutenant General Michael Moeller, who is clearly taking a much lower profile. We requested several times to interview General Moeller, but were told not to anticipate that happening. We then asked to talk to any member of his staff, but his spokesman responded in a final email, quote, "At this time, nobody from our office is doing interviews, neither in print or electronic."
With the current government on the West Bank, how long can they go? My arguing, strong argument, listen folks, we brought you security. It's safe on the streets. We have their version of kind of a National Guard. We have a good police force. How long can the current government here in the West Bank go with that argument with nothing else behind it?
Time we don't know. Clearly we don't know. But I think it is a fair analysis and assessment that we do know, and the actors do know here in the West Bank and the Palestinian Authority, that trouble is on the horizon if we don't get more than just new young Palestinians in uniform. Because it has to be for a purpose. What's the purpose? If the purpose was to serve Israel, that's a problem for Palestine. In the greater face of things, yes, violence is down, fine. But in the purpose of establishing a two states side by side, living in peace, democratic or not, we can deal with later. Palestine, Palestinians, the great families that are sitting out here with dinner just have to see what it all means. I see the nice uniform, I see the young face, I see the gun, okay, my neighborhood is better for sure, I can walk the streets again, but what exactly were you built for?
When we return, we'll give you a look at what might undermine all this progress. So stay with us. We've been looking tonight at the thousands of new Palestinian security personnel on West Bank streets, trained by America, working behind the scenes with their Israeli occupiers to root out Hamas. But this is the Middle East, where the long term matters most, and with parts of the conflict stretching back thousands of years, things are not always how they appear. Colonel Philip Dermer, who worked here for more than 30 years, knows this better than most, and he says the West Bank city of Hebron is a perfect example of how the short-term stability promoted by the United States could explode at any moment.
But to put it in context, this is all very good, and the USAID and the State Department in Washington say, hey, business is booming in the West Bank, 7% growth rate by the World Bank. Okay, good, but there's a but.
We walked towards an Israeli military checkpoint And Colonel Dermer said that for all the talk about the U.S.-trained new Palestinian security forces, it's clear to everyone in the West Bank who's really in charge here: the Israeli military.
If they define a threat and they think the Palestinian Authority will not do anything about it, they will act on their interest. And this is one of the downsides of how far we've come with this United States security training.
This part of Hebron is one of the few areas in the West Bank where Israeli settlers and Palestinians live extremely close to one another. But it would be misleading to say that Jews and Arabs are living here together. The two populations are separated by a maze of Israeli checkpoints and buffer zones. Colonel Dermer said that what is taking place here in Hebron is indicative of the problems throughout the entire West Bank, problems that threaten to undermine the fragile gains in security.
Center of Hebron was here once upon a time.
So these were Palestinian places?
Yes, all Palestinian homes and neighborhoods.
Were these Palestinians displaced?
They're gone. They're gone. They're not here. Their businesses are shuttered. They're gone.
Just a few years ago, this very street bustled with dozens of Palestinian businesses, like the ones on the other side of the checkpoint. But the Israelis relocated these businesses and closed the street in the name of security, because this is also home to some 700 Jewish settlers. They are protected by a robust Israeli military presence. All this makes the settlers feel safer, but the resentment among the Palestinians nearby is palpable. Israeli soldiers even blocked our Palestinian cameramen from walking these streets, but let the rest of our crew pass.
If we're now boasting in America and elsewhere that we've got a great new security progress within the Palestinian territories, great. But what's the real next step? How do we seal the deal? And you seal the deal by having life, by letting life become its normal self, take its normal pace. You're not seeing that here.
To the eye and ear, just walking through here, there's virtually no life.
Nobody. Gone. And it's been slowly. First one business, then two businesses.
Dermer says it's not enough for the U.S. to simply train new forces. A lasting stability, he says, will depend on Palestinians knowing that they're the ones in charge.
We keep seeing these agreements as end states, and they're not. They're markers along the way. You know, we can't stop at the fact that we have great-looking guys in uniform. And they're waiting. The kids in uniform out there will tell you, Dan, that, you know, we've done our part. I'm now in the street protecting Palestinian interests or taking care of Hamas or killing bad guys. Okay, well, what are you guys doing? What are you guys doing in Washington? We're waiting. We did our part. And when they see this, they're like, you aren't doing anything.
Well, what are we doing in Washington?
Well, it's a good question. It's a good question. I'm not so sure we understand the context out here at all.
Dermer says that problem is rooted in a very basic premise. The U.S. Security Coordinator's office is based in Jerusalem, and travel to the West Bank by its American staff is highly restricted for security reasons. Dermer says this fact alone compromises any hope of understanding such a complex place.
Who in the hierarchy of the American government walks the ground here, takes a look?
Nobody.
Sees what the situation is.
Nobody.
Up close and personal.
They don't come down. If it is, it's once in a tour, maybe twice. They don't do it. They have not been in here since 2000.
Dermer says that means American policymakers miss the context and small signs of tension you can only get from walking the streets and seeing things on the ground firsthand.
You see the signs here? You know, I would argue as an American policymaker, take that sign down. Just get rid of the sign. Start changing the whole attitude in the face of things in the populace.
But that's easier said than done in a place where both peoples say their claim to the land stretches back to the age of Abraham, an important figure in both religions whose tomb is just down the road.
Unfortunately, inside now has been walled off. This is the Jewish entrance.
The Jewish settlers don't even call this area the West Bank. They prefer the biblical name of Judea and Samaria, and they say they have a religious obligation to live here.
This area, Judea and Samaria, is the heart and cradle of Jewish history and of Jewish homeland. So there is no any justification for a Palestinian state.
Noam Arnon was a founding member of one of the most controversial settlements in the West Bank. It's a limestone warren of narrow alleys and steep stairways that slices through Palestinian Hebron. Arnon says it's the Palestinians who are to blame for the closed streets and Israeli military presence.
Now, Jews lived here hundreds of years. Why can't they live here again? I think the Arabs have to ask themselves why Jews have to be protected. It's in their hands.
The settlement is growing. Most settlers have more than 6 children. Arnon has 8. And as a result, this preschool classroom is bursting with activity. But Arnon says that the settlement is as much about the past as the future, and that every stone has a story.
So all around you see the previous Jewish community. It was a religious community. People lived here. Mostly they were not Zionists. They were simple Jews.
Jews and Palestinians lived in Hebron together for centuries. But in 1929, dozens of Jews were killed in what is now known as the Hebron Massacre. After Israel took over the West Bank in 1967, Arnon and his fellow settlers moved here and dedicated their lives to restoring the community.
Shalom, shalom.
They built a museum to Hebron's Jewish history, and they invite school children from Israel to come here to hear the story, with the hope of showing them why this settlement is worth protecting.
I think the most important thing for people in their life is to do something important, to do something meaningful. And that's what we feel here, that by living here, we are doing something very important. We continue the Jewish eternal chain in Hebron, and we say no to terror.
Arnon says he and his fellow settlers fear the United States and Israel are making a dangerous bet by training and working with Palestinian security forces. Forces, he says, could one day turn their guns on not only the settlers, but the Jewish state itself.
I think this is a mistake. So I want to advise to the American administration, General Dayton, and to the state of Israel, and to the American security leaders. I mean, they should reconsider it. They want to build a force that they can rely on. The question is if they really can rely on that.
Arnon brought our crew to a bluff within the settlement overlooking downtown Hebron. He denied that there was any reason for Arab resentment of the settlers.
From here you see the town of Hebron. It's something that maybe people in America will not understand. But it's a fact, it's a law. Jews are limited to one street to 3% of the town. And you see here these Arab children, no one is hungry and no one is suffering, and everyone is كيف الحال؟ الحمد لله كل شيء منيح؟ انت كويس؟ ليش انت جو تو المدرسة لقيت؟ لا كل شيء منيح؟ كل شيء يلا على معكم. I think it's very clear.
For all the talk of security and prosperity in the West Bank, one still feels the tension here. And it's not limited to the Jewish settlements. It's true the Palestinian security forces earn high marks from the Americans and many Israelis and Palestinians. But some say this intense focus on short-term security has led to brutal repression and human rights violations that, in the long run, could bring chaos back to the West Bank. Chaos similar to the unrest now sweeping across the Arab world. That part of the story when we return. Tonight we've been looking at a West Bank that is more prosperous and peaceful than it's been in years. But there remains a tension boiling beneath the surface.
4 Israelis have been shot dead in the West Bank near Hebron.
In the West Bank yesterday,
2
possibly
Israelis shot
designed
and
to
wounded
disrupt
today.
the talks.
4 Israeli
This past August, a family of 4 Israeli settlers was killed outside of Hebron. The military wing of Hamas claimed responsibility, and the incident quickly escalated into a major test for the new Palestinian security forces. They jumped into action, rounding up over 700 known Hamas members and sympathizers, including Nadal al-Kawasmi, who says he was held for months without proper charges and tortured.
أساليب الشبح يعني تتفاوت. في كان الشبح واقفا بحيث أن الإنسان يتم تقييده إلى الخلف بكلبشات وعصب عينيه. في كان برضه يتم الشبح بطريقة أقسى من خلال برضه تكبيل الشخص إلى الخلف وربطه في حبل وتعليقه في باب الزنزانة أو حتى في ماسورة خاصة في السقف.
Al-Kawasmi had spent 10 years in an Israeli prison for his ties to Hamas, and he says that was why he was swept up in the Palestinian Authority's dragnet. He told us the security forces used the murders as an opportunity to crack down on the political opposition, and that while in custody, he was tortured 18 hours a day by interrogators intent on silencing him and others.
أنا يعني زي ما أسلفت يعني أنا اعتقلت عند الإسرائيليين. هذا الأسلوب من التحقيق لم يكن موجوداً. يعني من 98 أنا أتذكر يعني صدر قرار من محكمة العدل العليا الإسرائيلية بمنع التعذيب في سجون الإسرائيليين بهذه الصورة وبهذه الطريقة. وتم التحقيق معي في 2003 لدى الإسرائيليين لم يتم شبحي ولا تعليقي. يعني الشعور يعني شعور لا أستطيع أن أصفه يعني أو أستوعبه حتى إنه أنت يعني هذه الأساليب لا يتم التعامل فيها معك من قبل الإسرائيليين، يتم التعامل فيها من قبل أجهزة الأمن الفلسطينية. كان شعور كتير يعني سيء للغاية وحتى فيش إمكانية لاستيعابه.
We spoke to several others, like Ahmed al-Salam Salhab, who said they were detained last fall in the same roundup. They were all referred to us by the Palestinian Authority's own independent human rights office, which investigated and found their allegations credible. Salhab, an auto parts dealer outside Hebron, now needs crutches to walk because of injuries he says were sustained during prolonged torture in a Palestinian prison.
طبعا السجن تحت الأرض درجة حرارة عالية جدا، يعني ما فيش فيه نفس، فيش فيه هواء اللي يتنفس، يعني يفتقر إلى الحياة، يعني ما حدا بيقدر يعيش فيه نهائيا. لما دخلنا غادة طبعا حد ما دخلنا الجميع كل واحد حطوا الكلبشات في ايديه ورا وربطوه على كرسي. عليت بعد زي ما ذكرت بعد 5-6 أيام أنا بطلت أقدر أوقف على رجلي خضرت هذه من أثر الغضاريف الموجودة في ظهري من أثر التعذيب. صاروا يحملوني حملان على الحمام، بطلت اجري هدول بطلت نهائيا يعني اقدر اوقف عليهم. صاروا يحملوني حملان على الحمام، طلبت منهم نقلي للمستشفى عدة مرات وقديش ألحت عليهم نقلي للمستشفى، فكانوا يودوني على المستشفى يضربوني إبرة ويرجعوني.
Back in Ramallah, I asked Prime Minister Fayyad to address the allegations of torture by security forces under his control.
I want to come to a subject which nobody wants to discuss,
yes,
but has to be discussed. I've talked to several people in recent months who say that they were tortured in recent months by Palestinian Authority security forces. Now, you must hear this. You must know about this.
Yes.
What measures have you taken? What specific measures have you taken to ensure as best it can be done that human rights aren't sacrificed for security?
It's more than I hear about it. It's a matter of complete preoccupation. I hold security meetings here in my office for the chiefs of our services. And they would tell you, as would our local commanders when I visit various districts, that's the first item on my list to check on, how prisoners are treated, abuse of any kind. It is definitely inconsistent with a key value and foundational principle on which the state is going to be founded, respect of human rights.
Are you or are you not concerned that you are already, but will be increasingly accused of sort of being, I'll use the phrase, a, quote, front man for the United States and for Israel? Because there are people who say, yes, he's brought security, he's definitely improved security, but this is really a result of Israel and the United States, and they'll spread that word among the people. Are you concerned about that?
Number one, I'm not really someone who feels they have to defend having good relationship with the United States. To the contrary, I'm someone who's proud of that. We are seeking to achieve something that is so enormously important to our people. Using phrases and terms like front man for, I'm front man for only one thing. This project, this enterprise that I call, building to a statehood. And so I'm really looking at the substance. I know what some are saying. Front man, think again and look again. This is about helping both Palestinians, but also Israelis.
This is where we are. On one hand, everything is nice. The sky is blue, the sea is blue, the ship is sailing, fun. But we know that if we don't move in time, we'll meet the iceberg.
Dan Meridor is Deputy Prime Minister of Israel, and he's the first to acknowledge that the security situation has gotten better in the West Bank. But he also realizes the issue of Palestinian and Israeli forces working together is a sensitive one.
How are the Palestinian Authority and Israeli Defense Forces working together on the West Bank? How does that work?
Well, it works in a way that the Israeli army and security services help the Palestinian Authority not to allow Hamas to infiltrate or incite or build terror cells or kill people, which they are trying to do. And there is a much more intensive cooperation. I don't think that making public is very helpful for them, but I think, in fact, there is a good cooperation.
Well, clearly they've improved, but how would you rate the Palestinian security forces?
Well, I think that they are better now than they were in the past, mainly in law and order for their own people, which is not an easy thing. They are working and acting against Hamas, but I haven't yet seen one person who killed Israelis that was indicted for killing Israelis. They don't do that. They do hold them sometimes under pretext, but to say you can't kill Israelis, I haven't heard them doing it yet in indicting people. But I don't want to overlook the improvement that has been made. I'm not saying here they don't do anything. They did something, but the final touch will be when we sit down and try to resolve the outstanding differences that we have on major issues that are conditions for which a state can be built.
In many ways, Minister Meridor was echoing what we heard on the other side of the wall in the West Bank. Sure, the security is better, but for all the good to last, the two sides need to reach a permanent agreement.
I think there is a contradiction between what we see and what we need to do. What we see is a very well-going economy, improvement in the economic situation. We see exceptionally no terror for practically 2 years because of deep and unprecedented cooperation between our services and their services. We have a common enemy called Hamas, and it works quite well. Thirdly, we see institutions building by the Palestinians, namely Salam Fayyad and his people. So things look good. The fears in the streets of bombs, of terror attacks, is not anymore what it used to be. On the other hand, it's very clear that we don't have a steady state. We need to move towards a solution. It can't stay like this forever.
But if, for whatever reason, that doesn't happen, back to the question, right now, things have improved.
Yeah.
When you walk the streets of Ramallah and Hebron, Jericho, you can see that things have improved. But how long can they stay that way if there isn't, for whatever reason, some real movement towards statehood?
Well, I don't have a time answer for that. I don't know. But I don't think there's a reason to postpone the negotiations and the agreement on statehood. I don't say that it's going to be easy. Even in our midst, even in our government, there are different views about those details, where the border should be, how much of the land should be in their hands, and how much should be retained in the blocks that Israel wants to retain, as was more or less in principle agreed, not in details yet, which makes it even more urgent to start it earlier. So we won't have a long time. We won't need to wait long for statehood to come.
Well, we went to Hebron and saw, just to take an example, in Hebron, businesses, if not booming, certainly bustling. Safety on the streets seemed to be quite good. even soccer matches at night from time to time, which would be inconceivable not long ago. But all of that, and yet the Israeli settlers living right in the heart of the city were basically walled off. Is there an understanding in the Israeli government and with the Israeli population why the local Palestinian population would find that so provocative, and what can be done about it?
As you say rightly, there was a very dangerous situation. There were attacks on Jews, people were killed in the streets. It was quite tough. So all sorts of walls and fences have been built, and places have been closed for Arabs because of protection that was needed to protect the lives of the people. Very few, hundreds of Jews who live among 100,000 and more Arabs. My feeling in principle, I don't know the details yet, that the better the situation on the ground is, the less security restrictions are needed. And I hope that if the situation continues and improves to be really a peaceful situation between the majority of Arabs and the minority of Jews living there, then the security barriers or arrangements could be eased for the benefit of both populations. I think it's important. People don't want to live in a situation of a wall, either those protected by the wall or those that are barred by the wall. It's unnatural. But in order not to have a wall and having the responsibility for people's life and the history of the very tough and cruel attacks on the Jewish population there, we take the steps cautiously. But we need to go in that direction.
The Israelis have dismantled several checkpoints in the West Bank that had impeded the flow of people and goods between Palestinian cities. It's an acknowledgement by the occupiers of the improved security. But at the barrier separating Israel from the Palestinian territory, checkpoints remain, stifling commerce and inflaming passion. Thousands of Palestinians passing in and out of Israel each day on their way to work are held up for hours at a time. Many we spoke to here say this is one of the most dehumanizing, frustrating, and inconvenient aspects of Israeli occupation. Now, quite a few Israeli checkpoints have been dismantled, no longer exist. But the ones that remain, when I talk to the Palestinians, they say, Dan Rather, you have no idea how difficult this makes life for us. Simply to get to work can be extremely frustrating and even humiliating, they use the word. Do you think that the building resentment and anger among the Palestinians against Israelis undercut the short-term security successes that have been on the West Bank?
It's always a tough question. In the short term, if you know that if you lift the barrier, you'll have terror activities and children, women and men will be killed, then you need to have it. But there is always the assessment that you ask for. Is it more beneficial or detrimental in the long run? And I think the fact that we've removed many of them is a sign that we have reconsidered and said things have changed, let's remove. So we need to remove as much as we can. But on the other hand, why don't we have any terror at all? It didn't come like this. It came because we built this fence and we built certain checkpoints so that terrorists who still exist can't move that easily. So there is always a balance. As long as there's no terror, we should remove more and more obstacles to the point that we feel that it's irresponsible to do it for people's lives.
In one sense, the story could start and end right here today because the wall. I mean, as you well know, once you put up a wall, this is signatory to, well, there's walls up, it makes a good neighbor, a good fence, we're done with you.
We met back up with Colonel Dermer at the wall on the outskirts of Ramallah. This barrier is a visible symbol of the paradox we've examined tonight. For the Israelis, it's created a sense of security in the short term. But Colonel Dermer says there are long-term costs.
Drastically changes the lives of Palestinians because now you can just no longer drive through a checkpoint. You have to stop, drive through, wait in line. You've got a big transiting station that you might have to walk through. There's Israelis behind armored glass, Israeli soldiers behind armored glass. There's no human contact whatsoever. And in order to get two peoples to live side by side and to up the ante for the next stage, we have to this should be toned down. This should be modified a little bit.
Dermer's critique extends to American policy in the Middle East, specifically the training of Palestinian troops. As we've seen tonight, this program has brought an unlikely stability to the West Bank, but Dermer says it hasn't eased the deeper frictions on the ground. Dermer, who's now retired, documented his critiques in a searing memo he sent to the U.S. Security Coordinator's office, American diplomatic staff, and military and elected officials. The memo created a stir, and its impact grew when it was picked up and published by an academic journal. It is now cited regularly in policy discussions in Washington about the future of American efforts in the West Bank. But Dermer says the first thing any policymaker should do is come experience what life is really like on both sides of the fence.
What has to change is not security in the sense of killing people and capturing terrorists. What has to change is a sense of daily life. Is my life better? Can my kids go to school? Can I go to work? Can I get around and can I come home? Period. If you have to face this every day, which you do, this can really take it out of you.
In recent weeks, we've seen in Egypt and across the Middle East that walls and troops can only contain public discontent for so long. How policymakers in Ramallah, Jerusalem, and Washington respond to this shifting momentum will set the course for peace or further unrest in this volatile region. We'll be watching.
And that's our report for tonight. For HDNet, from a checkpoint on the line between Israel and the West Bank, Dan Rather reporting. Good night.
If you'd like to add your name to an email list for information on upcoming programs, or if you would just like to send a question or comment, please email us at viewer@hd.net.
The following is an HDNet original presentation.
The following story contains graphic images that could be disturbing to some. Viewer discretion is advised.
Tonight, unrest and revolution rock the Middle East. A status quo shattered. But one volatile place hasn't appeared in the headlines. The West Bank. Once an epicenter of instability and violence, today is calm, thanks in large part to a little-known U.S. military program. Can this fragile stability hold? That remarkable story, tonight on Dan Rather Reports.
Good evening. We come to you tonight from the line between Israel and the occupied West Bank, a place that has long known violence, but where now there is calm, bustling business, new security. But there remains concern that this can't last and that there could be a return to bloodshed.
It's a bloodshed that many of us remember all too well. Until recently, these were the pictures that came to our television sets from the West Bank. Israeli Defense Forces, known as the IDF, squaring off with young Palestinian stone throwers. Tear gas, bullets, the scream of sirens. And then there were these gruesome images from Israel, the deadly aftermath of Palestinian suicide bombers, one after another, streaming in from the West Bank. On the diplomatic front, peace talks between Israel and Palestinians seeking statehood perpetually stalled at the starting line. All this leaves an impression of a region in constant conflict. But behind the scenes in recent years, something remarkable has happened. Tonight, we are taking you to a West Bank as you've probably never seen it. Even as much of the Arab world erupts in protest, the streets in this place, known for unrest, remain surprisingly calm, safe, even vibrant.
This is $2. You know this money? Yeah, it's rare.
A big change from the flying bullets of just a few years ago. Part of the new reality is a Palestinian security force that is now a visible presence on West Bank streets. Its troops are disciplined, professional, armed, and uniformed. But behind these fresh forces is a hidden presence, one that many are uncomfortable discussing. Under the radar, the United States has been funding and training these troops to help the Palestinian government bring stability to the West Bank. Yes, you heard that right. Palestinian soldiers, once the sworn enemy of Israel, now being trained by the United States. And this little-known program that would have been at one time unthinkable has now helped usher in a new era of security. But to understand how we got here, we have to start our story in a much different time.
Where you're walking right now, when I was an attaché here before, was nothing but a battleground.
And a lethal battleground.
Lethal battleground. The Palestinians were mainly on these two streets here. The IDF was nominally over here at the time because it was protecting their flank, which is where the Israeli settlers lived over there.
Retired U.S. Army Colonel Philip J. Durham to 2.5 million Palestinians and some 300,000 Jews.
The six-day Middle East war echoes along a second front, the diplomatic struggle at the United Nations Security Council.
For decades, the West Bank has been at the center of one of history's most intractable conflicts.
Israel reports close to 700 of their troops killed, over 2,500 wounded.
In 1967, Israel's Arab neighbors attacked the Jewish state in an effort to wipe it off the map. It was the third full-scale assault on the young Jewish state, a defining reminder that tiny Israel was surrounded by enemies.
The battle for Bethlehem is brief, bloody, and decisive.
But Israel fought back, and in a stunning series of battles, seized control of its enemy's land, including the West Bank from Jordan and the Gaza Strip from Egypt. For more than 40 years now, Israel has kept these territories as a security buffer. It's a state of uneasy occupation, made more explosive by the Israeli government's controversial decision to open up the land to Jewish settlements, now a major sticking point in the peace process. But throughout the West Bank, there's a new optimism. Business is booming. New construction is everywhere. There's even a 5-star hotel that just opened. On the surface, at least, there's a sense of normalcy. Colonel Dermer and I went to a popular restaurant in the city of Ramallah, where Fammer has witnessed the security improvements here firsthand. He was one of the few people who was around for the launch of the U.S. military program that trained these troops who have helped transform the West Bank.
This is a central market, so this is where all life exists in any one of the cities in Palestine. They come in from the villages, buy their goods, and go out. Very simple, as you and I have seen many times.
Colonel Dermer came to the Middle East first as a young backpacker and went on to spend much of his 30-year military career in the region. We brought him back here because he is one of the few American officials who has spent a lot of time serving in the West Bank.
Palestinian Authority control over here.
He painted a picture of what it was like to witness the Israeli-Palestinian clashes from the front lines.
So if the Israelis are shooting right here, which they would be doing, the Palestinians are here with rocks, okay, and we'd be in a safe position. This shop would be shut, but this guy would have the lights on and the shutter open, just hopefully somebody might duck in the middle and buy something and then run home.
It's not funny.
It's not funny, but it's very human that even in the middle of this conflict, these guys are trying to make a living.
Right.
So now that it's all out and about again, mashallah, Arabic for great, okay, now they can go about their business, right? And they're loving it. You see what's happening. It's booming. And the security's out here.
It is booming.
It's booming. It's packed. And there's no Israelis now. There's no IDF. Once upon a time, you'd see towers around here. Okay, but they're out of sight now.
The West Bank is a piece of land smaller than the state of Delaware. Perched between Israel and Jordan, it's home